And we bring back Rex Hoggard. And Rex, amidst all of the talk about the future of the PGA Tour, is a question that, while I would concede is not at the top of most people's lists, is being discussed on the range at PGA Tour Champions events. What happens to the over 50 league? So I want to start, before we dig in, with this. Financially, how does the PGA Tour Champions support itself currently?
I think this goes directly to the short answer, and it's probably not going to be popular, is private equity. We all know that SSG is involved now in the PGA Tour. We all know that they're taking a really hard look at the product and the bottom line. We've seen it. There's a plan that the policy board's going to vote on next week at the RSM Classic about cutting the number of tour cards available, but cutting almost every field size on the PGA Tour. That's a hard look at the product. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing for the senior tour, but certainly if you're playing that tour or you're involved in that tour, you have to wonder where this falls in the product.
It's subsidized currently by the PGA Tour. Proceeds from the PGA Tour sustain it, because if you're, if you're a PGA Tour member, wouldn't you want a place to play at the age of 50? The question is, does the current crop of superstar players, do they care about that? Do they care about growing future tour players in places like Latin America or in Canada with PGA Tour Latino America, et cetera? So questions that have to still be answered. What does a company pay, if you know, to sponsor a PGA Tour Champions event? I
mean, it's going to vary from tournament to tournament. It's not going to be nearly as much as a PGA Tour event. And to your point, yes, it's subsidized. And yes, I'm sure this is something the Tour is going to look at. I would flip it on the other side and say, what's the return on this? And you just went through a list, a very long list of unbelievable stories that people pay attention to. I think Tim O'Neill is the story of the fall simply because of that perseverance. I think that resonates with even the average golf fan. So if you're someone who's calling the shots in Ponte Vedra and you're going to decide the future of the PGA Tour Champions, you also have to ask yourself, is the product worth it? And I think a lot of fans, my father-in-law for one, would tell you, yes, it's worth it.
And companies get 2 days of a pro-am, correct, on the PGA Tour Champions, and a chance to mingle with stars that most people might be familiar with. Back to that proposed framework agreement, which might be on the verge of being hammered out soon. How do you think it'll affect the PGA Tour Champions?
I think they would be thrown in with private equity. And again, this has...
You think it survives?
I do think it survives. It survives on some level because the second question that you didn't ask, but to follow up, is if you're going to cut the number of cards on the PGA Tour, and I've spoken with a lot of tour players over the last week since that proposed plan to cut the number of fully exempt members, then they want to boost what the Korn Ferry Tour is. They want to make that bigger so they give players an opportunity to play there and develop and work their way onto the PGA Tour. If you're counting up the dollars and you have the calculator, that money is going to have to come somewhere. If you're private equity, you're going to have to make a trade-off. Whether that trade-off is going to be the senior tour remains to be seen, but that's where this seems to be headed.
Timing, as the old saying goes, is everything in life. There is one other possibility. Tiger Woods turns 50 December 30th next year, 2025. Maybe he gives the absolute rocket boost to the PGA Tour Champions. Sense is he might want to play a little bit.
How many times have we had this conversation, just sitting around talking, is Tiger Woods going to play? If you and I were having this conversation 5 years ago, I would have told you absolutely not. Tiger Woods will have no interest in the Champions Tour when the time comes, simply because he's going to get to a point where he has won so much. What's going to be the motivation? After what has transpired the last 5 years with Tiger Woods and all of the injuries and everything he's gone through, when he does come back and play, you and I both have seen it. He loves it. He loves not just the competition part of it. He loves being on the range. He loves being in the locker room. He loves going to the physio trailer. He would love standing there giving Langer the needle for winning at the age of 67 years old. That's the part I think would bring him to the Champions Tour. More than anything else, at the very least, he plays the majors, maybe the big events, and that gives them something to hang their hat on.
Maybe with private equity, there are some talks in the works, Tiger to participate financially,
sure.
In some maybe new events on the PGA Tour Champions where he would derive some benefit in that respect.
And you have a generation of players like Tiger Woods who is reaching that age, who I think could make a huge impact on the PGA Tour Champions. We love the Tim O'Neill stories, but imagine what Tiger would do to one of their events.